Welcome, everybody. We're here for a March program from the Literature Committee, and we welcome you all to the 19th Century Charitable Association in Oak Park, where it is our vision to be a dynamic cultural center for community learning. I am Deb W. Hammond, Co-Director of Programs and the Literature Chair. Our 30 programs this season of our enrichment series are a part of our mission to strengthen our community through learning, giving, and sharing our landmark building. Today, we're very happy to welcome Kathleen Rooney. She's here to talk about her book, From Dust to Stardust. It's a historical fiction about silent movie star Colleen Moore and how the fairy castle became a fixture in Chicago's Museum of Science and Industry. She's a founding member of Rose Metal Press, a nonprofit press in hybrid genres, and another founding member of Poems While You Wait for commissioned poetry on demand, and it's done on manual typewriters. She lives in Chicago and teaches at DePaul.
Thank you so much, Deb, for the lovely introduction. So I am a professor at DePaul, and whenever I start a class or a talk, I kind of like to give a roadmap of where we're going to be going together. And so I am going to be giving this slideshow presentation that will tell you about the real-life inspiration for my novel, the fairy castle, the silent film industry, a lot of other things along the way. This slideshow is kind of an answer to the question that's always my favorite to get about a book. Whenever I put out a book, people ask, why did you write that? Or where did you get the inspiration? Or what made you want to tackle that subject? And so this is my longer with slides answer. And so this talk is called The Original A Star is Born, Star is Born, because Colleen Moore, who in my book becomes Doreen O'Dare, because it is fiction, although without Colleen there would be no Doreen, is the real-life inspiration for that often told Hollywood story. So we'll get there, but that's my title. So the first kind of answer to why did you write this book is on this slide, because I like to say that everybody goes through life kind of accumulating kindling or material for future projects, that as you then go forward through life after accumulating that material, you encounter things that can serve as sparks that sort of catch that material and kindle the kindling. And so in this case, when I was 8 years old, my family, including my sister Beth, who some of you met at lunch, she's back there, moved from Shreveport, Louisiana to Woodridge, Illinois, just a little further west of here. And one of the best aspects of moving was we were so close to the city, which I'm sure everyone appreciates, just being able to go and have all these cultural experiences. And one of the best ones I always thought was the Museum of Science and Industry, which was, built in this repurposed building from the 1893 World's Exposition. And how many people have been there? Yes. Okay, good. It has a lot of great stuff in it, like so much. It's like a city within the city. Every time I go, I feel kind of overwhelmed because it has the coal mine that you can go down in. It has the German sub. It has the Zephyr, the very aerodynamic streamlined train. But my favorite thing was, as Deb noted, the sort of unusual, the unexpected Colleen Moore fairy castle. How many of you guys have seen it? Yeah, cool. One of my goals is to get people who've seen it to go visit it again with new eyes, and then also if you, for some reason, haven't had the pleasure, to inspire you to go see it. But from the moment that I laid eyes on it, I was captivated by it because it has all these little details, and if you have been, you know it has this cradle, which is the one that was in the treetop in Rockabye Baby, the famous song. It also has my favorite room, the library, which has all these tiny books, which are many of them signed by famous luminaries of the day. And it has all these little chairs for the fairies to sit and read, very literate fairies. And this is the prince's bedroom, which has this polar bear rug, which I love knowing is actually an ermine skin, but the ermine didn't have the right kind of teeth, so Colleen was like, let's give it mouse teeth to make it look scarier. It's very fierce. And then I'll kind of go through some of these. Don't worry, I'm not going to say too much about these. But when I first went, and maybe some of you had this experience too, you would go around the castle, which is 1 ton and enormous and made out of all kinds of precious materials, and you would pick up a little black telephone headset, and you would hold it up to your ear, and through the earpiece, you would hear the voice of Colleen Moore. It was actually her. It was her narrating all of the rooms in the castle, and she would tell you all these great little details. Like in the library, she would tell you that one of the chairs was shaped in a weird way. It was almost like upside down because there was a little fairy boy who liked to read with his feet in the air. And so as a kid, I was A, captivated by this, which I'll show a few more slides and hit some high points, but B, I was captivated by, like, who would do that? Like, what kind of person makes an object like this? Like, what kind of magical person? So we'll get to that. But, here you see, like, the mother of pearl floor. You see the dining room, which has King Arthur's round table. And the thing that's so cool is that Colleen and her designers wanted it to be a true fairy castle, where it just pulled from all kinds of fairy castles from, or fairy tales from all over the world. And so it's just this hodgepodge that pays no attention to logic or reality. It's just like we've got King Arthur next to Russian fairy tales, next to Japanese fairy tales. It's just all over the place in the best, I think, way. And then you have the kitchen, and as you can see, she gets some of the fables like the ant and the grasshopper, that good lesson about being a hard worker. It has a storage area because even fairies accumulate too much stuff. It has the cave where Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves hid their jewels. And then it has kind of this like museum within a museum sort of vibe. This is like a miniature Cellini sculpture that, it actually is in Italy, but Colleen was like, I like it, let's put it in the castle. And then these 2 little suits of armor on either side were given to Colleen by Rudolph Valentino. Because how it is when people find out you have a hobby, they give you presents. But when you're like a silent movie star, it's extra. And then this is the princess's bedroom, so you can see her bed, and then you can see the bathrooms were really beautifully done, and there will be a callback to this, so remember this picture. There's the chapel. Fittingly, we're here on St. Patrick's Day. Colleen Moore was of Irish descent. She was Irish American, and so in the chapel you have this Celtic cross design. She has like stuff that's kind of inspired by the Book of Kells. And then, I don't know, if you like miniatures, you have to have this obligatory shot where you show, like, how miniature is it with something for scale? And so here is a penny next to some of the books that she has in her collection. And so I'll, talk even more about Colleen Moore, but she was a celebrity herself. Like, it's hard to overstate how famous, but a charming detail that I came across as I was, writing this project is that she was an autograph hound. She was, her whole life, even though she was famous, in awe of other highly accomplished people. So she carried these little books around in her handbag, and when she saw, Franklin Roosevelt or whoever, she would, approach them and ask for their autograph, which I think is so funny. So here's one. And she played a lot of Cinderella-esque roles, and I'll show some film clips in a few minutes, but fittingly, she put a lot of Cinderella into the fairy castle, so you can sort of see the stroke of midnight, Cinderella fleeing the ball. And then I think you can see it inside this harpsichord. There's also the pumpkin coach painted. And this is the thing, like, I was obsessed with this castle because there's so many details. Like, you could see it a million times and still not see every single beautiful aspect of its construction. Here you see she turned this pair of jewelry clips, these little emerald clips from her personal collection, into these chairs for the bedroom of the princess. And then as we, so that's the castle. So I'll sort of pause on this slide for a moment and say that's, sort of material 1 of the kindling. So I don't know, I still like to take people to show them this castle, but especially as a kid. And then now shifting to kind of like the person who created it, because at the time that I went to visit the castle in my own childhood, and again, some of you may remember this, it had this like antechamber, this little pre-room that you went into that had all these wall texts and, you know, ephemera, posters, and pieces of information about who Colleen Moore was. And that's gone now, which I think is unfortunate. But I feel lucky that I was able to see it, because did some of you like to watch Mr. Rogers? Yeah, Mr. Rogers, love, huge fan. And a thing I love about Mr. Rogers is when he would do his special like field trips or like segments where you would leave the land of make-believe and go learn something, he would never say, like, we're gonna go to the glasses factory. He would say, we're gonna go meet the people who make the glasses. And I love that, because everything in the world is made by someone for some purpose. And so one of the books in the castle has this inscription from F. Scott Fitzgerald, which says, I was the spark that lit up flaming youth, and Colleen Moore was the torch. What little things we are to have caused all that trouble. So what was all that trouble? What is he talking about? You got to find out some of it in this antechamber. And so among the many things that I was intrigued by were that she, you know, before her departure to Hollywood, she was very young. She went out when she was only, I mean, she lied about her age, as all good actresses do. And so she was either 14, 15, or 16 when she went to Hollywood. But in any event, she was very young. So her grandmother came with her as a chaperone. And in the novel, From Dust to Stardust, I have fun imagining what that relationship would have been like. You know, what kind of grandma is like, yeah, I'll go to Hollywood with my teen granddaughter and, you know, keep her safe from predatory industry types. So again, I love thinking about that. And she bobbed her hair. You can see in these pictures, she was kind of the quintessential flapper, and she sort of popularized that. She was married to, her first marriage was to her producer, John McCormick, and that's where the sort of Star is Born aspects came in. And then the other thing that I thought was so cool is that this fairy castle began as a hobby, but then the Great Depression hit and she toured it around to raise money, which I'll talk more about too. So just a little bit about, you know, like why she was so good. She was like the top box office draw from 1927, 28, 29. But when she went out there, she was just on a contract to D.W. Griffith, because her uncle was this guy, Walter Howie, who, if you know Ben Hecht, the great Chicago writer, he wrote a play called The Front Page, which is about sort of like the cutthroat world of journalism in, you know, the early 1900s. And her uncle was like a character in that. And so he was owed a favor by D.W. Griffith, and Griffith was like, what can I do for you? And Howie was like, I've got this niece. And of course, everyone in Hollywood, they're like, oh, not another niece. But he was like, a favor's a favor. So she went out only on a 6-month contract, and nobody really thought she would necessarily amount to anything. But then she stayed for so long. And so I'll kind of go through these quickly, but you can just sort of see how she, I don't know, she's so good even in still images. She just has this sort of aura. She has that star quality. So here she is in the cover of Picture Play. Here she is dressed as sort of like a harlequin. Here she is just in like a coat that I would totally wear. Here she is as a ballerina. Here she is with Antonio Moreno, one of her favorite co-stars, and you can see she autographed it on her legs, very saucy. And then here she is as a pirate for like no reason. She was never in a pirate movie, but they just did these like fun publicity stills. And then here she is. She was mostly a comedian, as I think you can sort of tell in the pictures, but she also played some dramatic roles, so here she is being a little more serious. And then here's the callback. This is her in her bathroom, because what's fun is that her designers for the fairy castle were the same designers that she worked with on her mansion in Bel Air, and a lot of them came from Hollywood too, so they were set designers who would design homes for movie stars, and then she was like, let's design a home for my fairies, and they were like, okay. So this is Naughty But Nice, a movie poster, which I think kind of captures some of Colleen Moore's appeal, because she was, and you'll see in the film clips, she was very magnetic, she was very attractive, but she wasn't a vamp. She was kind of this girl next door, but like with a lot of assertiveness, and I think that's kind of what made her so popular. And you'll kind of see it in these different pictures, but or different clips rather. But to me, why she's so appealing is she has this like intelligence. Like she just feels like if she stepped off the screen, you could have like a really smart conversation with her. And I know that everyone who likes a celebrity thinks that they and the celebrity would be friends, but I really think that I would be Colleen Moore's friend. So all of that was sort of like the kindling. And so flash forward to December of 2016, when I was kind of thinking about how people need wonder and awe and solidarity to get through dark times. And I went, as I try to do every year, to the Museum of Science and Industry, because they do that Christmas Around the World exhibit where they have all the Christmas trees decorated by people from different cultures. And I always, every time I go there, I visit the fairy castle, and they put a little Christmas tree in the fairy castle too. And I was like, oh yeah, like Colleen Moore, I should write a novel about her. And here she is inside the fairy castle when she's older. She retired from the silver screen, but she was, very much like a fixture of Chicago, and she would go visit her castle often. And then here are her granddaughters, which I love this. So this is Alice, who's 7 in this picture, Alice Hargrave, who some of you might know or know her work. She's a really talented photographer and visual artist, and I've gotten to meet her over the course of writing this book. She's great, but this is her at 7, sort of standing in the castle. And then this is her other granddaughter, Kathleen, really love that name, great name, and sort of showing like the wingspan of the chapel. And so that's, kind of the pivot is when you're a kid, you know some stuff, but when you're an adult writing a novel, you hopefully try to know more stuff. And so I started to actively research her, and I would say that as an adult, I found her even more fascinating because back when I first saw the picture, or the castle, it was like 1988, and we didn't have like the internet per se as we know it now. And so you couldn't just see everything really easily. So now, when I was in the 21st century, I was able to watch as many of her movies as I could, but as you can see from the statistic on the slide, that's not a lot, because the tragic thing about the silent film era is that most of that material is lost, like permanently lost. Like we couldn't see it if we wanted to. An estimated 75% of all movies globally made before 1929 have been destroyed, either on purpose or by accident. Because when people were first making these movies, and this is something I have fun depicting in the novel, they didn't consider it necessarily an art form. They didn't consider it worth preserving. They were kind of like, this is a popular entertainment. The phrase cranking them out comes from early Hollywood because, you would crank the camera to do the filming, and so you're cranking them out. And so a lot of times they would make these movies, send them out, circulate them, and then they would, summon back the film reels and melt them down to recover the silver, because it was silver nitrate, and it was very costly, and so they wanted to repurpose that and get, so the celluloid they could burn, but the silver they would repurpose. And also the sort of, every time I say the statistic, I've given this talk a lot, but it always blows my mind every time I say this, silver nitrate, 2 things. The beautiful thing is that's where the phrase, the silver screen, comes from. And if you've ever had the pleasure of seeing a beautifully preserved print, because most of the silent movies, like I think a lot of people are like, I don't like silent movies. I don't think they even know if they like silent movies because they're watching like a bad print screened at the wrong speed. And so it's hard to tell. But if you see a beautifully preserved print, it's luminous, it's radiant, it looks otherworldly. It's so just, it takes you back 100 years ago to what it might have been like to see a movie before you could just like turn on Netflix or Hulu or watch anything all the time. It was truly enchanting. So that's the good thing. The bad thing about silver nitrate is it is highly, highly flammable, and it spontaneously combusts. It will just burst into flame, and it will burn inextinguishably even when submersed fully in water. It's like a crazy substance. So there's just not a lot of these things that held up. So I embarked on this quest to know more about her, and I read her biography, Silent Star, and I learned that she was the original inspiration for A Star is Born, and so I promised to tell that story. And this is her friend, Adela Rogers St. John's, who is this famous, as they would have called them, gal reporter. She worked for the Hearst papers, and she was a gossip columnist. And so Adela kind of watched her tumultuous relationship with her producer, John McCormick, and took notes, and then came up with this script, What Price Hollywood, which came out in 1932 and then got remade later in the 30s as A Star Is Born, the 50s, the 70s, and of course this century with Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper. So it is that kind of story of Colleen met this guy who was really, really helpful, but also alcoholic. They fell in love, and the relationship was both beneficial and really problematic. And so I had fun writing that, like what kind of movie star is okay when her gossip columnist best friend writes this kind of spicy movie about your failed first marriage, but Colleen was like, that's fine, like it is a good story. And then I also learned that when her castle was complete, and here's the thing to pick up the thread that Deb kind of put out, it is weird that it is at the Museum of Science and Industry, but it is a feat of engineering. It's 1 ton, it's made of aluminum to be as light as possible. Even with that lightness, it's 1 ton. And it's fully like disassemblable and reassemblable because she made it to pack and ship with the intention of touring it, and that it also has electricity that works and also running water. So it is scientific. It's pretty impressive. And so the thing, I'll talk kind of about this tour, but her life, part of the reason that I wanted to write this novel is that Colleen Moore was born at just the right time, either 1899, 1900, or 1901, depending, to be a silent star. Like, she was born before this medium really took off, and then she was like just hitting the right time to go out to Hollywood and become the first sort of crop of celebrities from this new genre. And so by the time sound came in, which of course, if you're a movie person, it was The Jazz Singer, it was 1928, and that was the first synchronized sound. They had had sound effects before, but it took a while for it to take over. Like, it wasn't like they just suddenly had sound. It sort of crept in, but 1928 is when they were like, okay, this is happening. And so they had a few years to kind of get used to it. And in that time, this is when Colleen's marriage was falling apart. This is when her career was sort of at an inflection point where she had to decide if she wanted to keep doing it. And she could. She passed her sound test. She could sing. She could speak well. She could memorize lines. She didn't have a regional accent. But how many of you have seen Singin' in the Rain? A few. There's, it's about Hollywood, and it's about the coming of sound. And if you remember, there's that scene, very comic, where they're all, on the soundstage, and they're gathered around a potted plant, like talking into the potted plant, because that's where the microphone is hidden. So for a while, like Talking Pictures, when you go back and watch them now from like, the late 20s to the early 30s, a lot of them don't look so good because the sound wasn't perfected. So you went from this very kinetic, almost like ballet of movement to this very stagey, claustrophobic thing. So she was kind of like, I don't want to do that. Like, that's not fun to me. Movies are fun to me because I move, and you'll see that in the clips. So she decided that she was going to throw herself into this castle, and as she was finishing it, the stock market crashed, and America was in one of the worst economic situations it had ever been in. So she set out to raise $1 million for children's charities. She only made it to $650,000 because World War II started, and she was unable to keep touring because the president asked everyone to stay off the railroad so that they could be used for troops and supplies. But I learned that when she came to Chicago, she met her third husband. She had kind of a rebound, a second marriage that didn't really work out in between her terrible first husband and then this guy who was great. But what she did was, she would come to a town, she would set up the castle in a department store, and she would charge 10 cents to children and 25 cents to adults so everyone could come see it. But she would also do this thing where the night before, the weekend before, you're talking about your gala, right? Galas. She would have a gala where the higher dollar people would come and donate even more. And her whole thing was, people asked her, as you can imagine, like, why don't you, you're wealthy beyond compare, why don't you just throw some money and be done with it? And she said she didn't want to kind of be a savior in that way. She wanted to help people get together collectively, experience wonder, see something beautiful, and contribute to saving, their own communities. And I think that's like super smart and really moving. And so, of course, we don't do good because we're going to be rewarded. We do good because it is good and it is right. But I like when people get something good out of doing good, and she got this third husband, Homer Hargrave, who was a vice president at Merrill Lynch. And she also got the family that she was sort of resigned to never getting. She couldn't have kids of her own by herself, so she kind of inherited these stepkids who, take away the step, they were her kids. Like, she stepped into this family. Homer was a widower, and she just loved the kids so much. They loved her. Her grandkids, like I said, Alice, and just hearing Alice talk about like what a cool grandma she was. So I love that she kind of, by having her fairy godmother grandma, got to be Cinderella, and then when she had the means, when she had established herself, she turned around and was a bunch of people's fairy godmother. I also learned that she, being with Homer and seeing him do finance, became very interested in how to help women invest, because she kind of had this bad first marriage and realized that it's very, very important for women to have financial independence if possible. And so she wrote this book called How Women Can Make Money in the Stock Market. And it's a great book. It's 1968. It's kind of right at the height of women's lib, and that's what she kind of dedicated this next act of her life to. And you can see she's still looking, this is the author photo, still looking very glamorous. So yeah, I knew I had to tell her story. If you've heard of Jeremy and Major Whittlesey mentioned, I did my Zoom program here. It's better to be in person, I will say. But I also have written other historical books. Lillian Boxfish Takes a Walk. And so that's kind of what I like to do, is find these historical figures who are super, super famous in their day, but who kind of have, I don't want to say that nobody knows who Colleen Moore is, but she's not as known as like Clara Bow or Louise Brooks. And so I kind of wanted to help people know about her again. And so I'm just going to share a few clips, because I think, the beautiful thing about doing this research now is I got to sort of watch, like, why did she become so famous? And so are you ready to watch a few clips? So we're going to watch just a little bit of, like, from the front and the back of this clip of the movie Flaming Youth. I promised I would come back to that. And so Flaming Youth is the book that F. Scott Fitzgerald and the film that he referenced in that little quote that he put in his autographed book. And so this is where she first kind of like ended up with bobbed hair. She starts the beginning of the movie looking more like an ingenue, but finishes it looking more like a flapper. And it's hard to overstate how influential the flapper was. I think now we think it's this fun Halloween costume, and it is, but it was so much more. It was this way for young women to kind of assert their freedom and feminism. They, cut their hair. The flapper was from galoshes that they didn't tie. They were like careless with their experience. They stopped wearing corsets and just like were physically free. They smoked. They kissed men who they wouldn't eventually marry. Like, it was very intense. And I think, this you'll see, and I think it's very charming, but it might seem quaint, but at the time when this movie came out in 1923, it was controversial. It caused tons of censorship. It was banned in Boston. Boston loves to ban things, but still. A theater proprietor in Seattle announced that he would show it, and the city said, don't, it's too scandalous, and he showed it anyway, and he got arrested. Up in Wisconsin, all these like Christian leagues tried to say that it would corrupt the morals of the youth. So needless to say, the movie did great because it was so scandalous. So here you'll kind of see why. I'm just going to show a couple clips where she's at the beginning, kind of being this ingenue, going to her first party, and then at the end when she has this older boyfriend who's also her mother's ex-boyfriend. So it was like, it was pretty spicy. So here's just a little bit. And it'll be silent because it's a silent movie, but I think you'll get it. So you kind of, I think you get the picture. But then, I might have to drag it. Sorry. Here we go. Oh no. I don't want to show the whole thing. Wait, let's see. So yeah, she's not supposed to go to this party, so you see her sort of sneaking down. Actually, I'll let it keep playing while I talk, and then we'll see how far we get. But the thing that I was going to show you, and we'll try one more time, is this is only one reel. This is an 11-minute reel, because the thing about film at the time is it would come on these like canisters which contained reels, and then you would have a projectionist who would be up in the projection booth who would actually have to do kind of a hard job of, changing the reels when it was time to, go to a new scene. And so all the rest of the 11-minute reels besides this one of Flaming Youth were destroyed. She donated all her films to the Museum of Modern Art in New York City because she was one of the people early on who realized that this was an art form that she wanted to try to preserve. And MoMA said, "We will take care of them," and they did not. Then in the 60s, she was asked to participate in a film festival during like a revival of the silent era. And so she called up MoMA and asked, and they went to check, and they opened the canisters, and they found they had just melted into this goo, which is the other thing that silver nitrate does before it spontaneously combusts. It kind of disintegrates into this like gelatinous ooze, and you can't do anything with it. It's wrecked. So you can watch this whole thing on YouTube. And I won't be able to show you the end now, but I urge you to go find it, because the other thing that's very scandalous about this is that there's this pool party scene where they did this classic Hollywood contest where they put out a call to all the small towns for all the collegiate swimmers, all the male athletes with the Adonis physiques, and all the would-be beauty queens, and they had them all come to populate this swimming scene. And they're not literally naked, but they're in these like skin-tight bodysuits that leave nothing to the imagination. And so people were really scandalized by this scene. It's just all these like super hot people leaping into a swimming pool, and everybody was like really titillated and also nervous about it. So treat yourself to that. We'll watch the whole clip. This is her in her movie Ella Cinders. So Flaming Youth was kind of more of a dramatic comic, like a dramedy role. And this is her just fully being comic. And when she gave herself over to being funny, that's when her career really took off. And I think I love Charlie Chaplin, I love Buster Keaton, they're amazing, I love Harold Lloyd, but I think the women comedians don't get as much credit. And so this is part of my mission too, and I wrote about it a lot in the novel, is just how she learned how to be comic. And she came up with a lot of her bits with her directors, and she had a gag man, a comedy constructor, Mervyn Leroy, who went on to become a director. And so this is one of the early bits that they kind of made her name with. What a talent. This is a still from one of my favorite movies of hers called Why Be Good, where she's dancing the Charleston and she's winning a contest. And then this is, I'll just show a little bit of this scene from also Why Be Good. And this is, and then this will be the last clip, and there's just a couple more slides, and then it'll be Q&A time. But the thing, kind of that I was saying about how when sound came in, there was this temporary stasis, this static nature that crept back into motion pictures. They didn't move as much, but they kept making, you can see this is from 1929, the jazz singer was 28, so people kept making silent movies in that little interim. And I think, for me, most of my favorite silent movies come from that era, and it's because that was the sort of apotheosis, the apex of what they had learned to do. So to me, they're the best, or perhaps it's just that as, a 21st century viewer, they're the ones that are most intelligible to my sensibility of how movies should be paced and the tempo they should have. But I think you can see here just why she became so famous, why 1929 was one of the years that she was the top female box office draw. And so it's kind of a classic Cinderella tale. She plays this shop girl, right? She's in her little black dress, like the department store girls all had to dress in this way, and work in the different departments. And her name's Pert Kelly. Again, it's St. Patrick's Day. She always played these kind of like Irishy characters. And she, is out on the town the night before and falls in love with this kind of Prince Charming after she wins the Charleston contest. And then she finds out later that this is the boss's son, the department store where she works. So it's a really charming movie, and it's a romantic comedy, so there's lots of connection and disconnection and misunderstanding. But I just want to see her acting a little bit in that later era. So she's outside his office, and she's going to try to tell him that, who she is and that they know each other. She's been fired by the dad because the dad doesn't think she's good enough for her son. He thinks she's this gold digger. But she thinks he did it, so it's not spoiling too, but that you get the point, it's this kind of movie where there's all this like misunderstanding. Highly recommend the whole thing. I think the whole thing is on YouTube. So to kind of wrap up this part, so that's my 40-minute answer to like, why did you write this book? Because I just thought the more I learned about her and the more I watched her films and the more I learned about what she was truly able to accomplish with the fairy castle, the more I thought she was just this really exceptional person. Just a couple more details about her that I think are, revealing is that when she would tour the castle, she knew that a lot of the children's charities that she would donate the money in a given town to would be for children with disabilities. And so she came up with the idea, because she knew that a lot of the kids would be blind. She made replicas of the material, like the little objects that would be in the castle, so that those kids could come see it by holding the objects. So she would take those kids through on a special tour so they could touch them. And this is in the 30s. She was just so smart about considering people. And then she also kept her style, right? She bobbed her hair in 1923, and you can see this is, a young Colleen, and then this is her older with a reel of film, because she in the 70s and 80s would travel around a lot during that revival and talk about the silent movie era. And when you see her in pictures and clips, she looks her age. She looks like she's 80, but she has this, the word I have on the screen is this joie de vivre. She has this joy of life. And I think it's fun to write flawed characters, and it's fun to write anti-heroes, and I will continue to do so. But I think there's something truly heroic about a person who is able, to go through various things, or to have this dream or this determination and pursue it and achieve it, but do it in a way where she, stayed kind and stayed full of wonder and stayed full of joy that she tried to bring to other people. And I think more of that is good. And so I hope that, like I said, if people hear my talk or get the book that's downstairs from the pile, they'll be inspired to watch some of these films and maybe go see the castle. And sort of this last image, this is, there were all those talk shows in the 70s and 80s, little local talk shows and things, and this is one called Girl Talk. And so here she is talking to Joan Crawford, and I have no idea what they're talking about, but I just love how they look there. So that's why I wrote this book. And if you have Q's, I have A's.
Thank you very much, Kathleen.
Oh, that was delightful. I never saw the Fairy House. I need to make a trip.
Yes.
But I am from Rochester, the home of George Eastman, and I know that there was a fire many years ago and a lot of film was lost. I was just wondering if you did any research there, or if you were able to find anything.
Yeah, that is a really important archive. So yes, I didn't go there, but a lot of the stuff that I was able to find is as a consequence of that. And there's my favorite thing that I didn't end up using in this book, but that I recommend is, and it's also again on YouTube, but there's this interview with Louise Brooks, who ended up living in Rochester at the end of her life. And, Kevin Brownlow, this expert, goes to interview her, and it's just she just answers the door. She's in a house coat, her hair's in a ponytail, and she just talks about the silent era. So I didn't use that directly, but that, is a very cool Rochester archival thing. And a thing that I do in the book is, Colleen becomes Doreen O'Dare, and her main love interest, besides her husband, who's based on the director King Vidor, becomes Victor Marquis. But everyone else, the minor characters, I use Louise Brooks's name, Lillian Gish, Marion Davies, because I do want people to be intrigued and go back and find more of these forgotten gems, these people who are so delightful. And I also, a question I do get is why change some names and not others? And that's a great question. And the reason that I changed the principals' names is twofold. One, to emphasize that it is fiction, because a lot of these people, including Colleen, have biographies. Like I said, Silent Star, it's a biography, it's great. And I mostly stick to stuff, but I make stuff up, I leave stuff out. And so I definitely want people to understand that this is an imaginative work, it's not a strict biography. And then also just to help me in the writing, when you're writing a historical topic, I find there's a temptation, because history is so fascinating, to try to throw everything in, but that makes for a bad book. You end up with a 700-page disaster. So when I'm it's Doreen, I can keep it to 270.
Did she ever make any talkies or just silent?
Great question. She made 4 talking pictures. One was so bad that she is smiling Irish eyes actually on this holiday, and it was just so full of, she hated making it, it was in her contract, and it was full of really terrible stereotypes about Irish people. And even as she was making it, she tried to get out of it, but they made her, and she was like, no one should ever see it. It's like the worst movie. So don't see that one. I don't think you even could. But the one that she made that I highly recommend, that's really, really good, is called The Power and the Glory. And it's not the 60s one. There's one called that from the 60s, but it's 1934, and it's one of Spencer Tracy's earliest film roles, and they act opposite each other. And it's kind of a proto-Citizen Kane. It is a great movie. I got to screen it at the Music Box, and it's so good. And it's like a charming artifact because you can really see how they were taking what they learned from the silent era and applying it to talkies, and then going further with the ability to talk. And it has that kind of, this isn't any kind of spoiler, but at the very beginning, kind of like Citizen Kane, it's this guy, he's a titan of industry, he's the head of the railroad, but he takes his own life. And then the whole movie from that first 2-minute like shocking revelation is like, why? Like how did he get so powerful, and why, if he was so powerful and rich, was he so unhappy with his life? And it's so good. She also made The Scarlet Letter, which she didn't like. She said that was the only movie that she made just for money because she was in the middle of making her fairy castle, and she was running out of money because it was the Depression, and so she just did that for the paycheck to do her castle dream. And then she made another one called The Social Register that's also good, but at that point she was just sort of like, I've been here since I was a teen, it's not as much fun, so she left.
A long time ago, I went every Saturday to the Museum of Modern Art to see the silent movies.
Yeah.
Which were full and new. I saw various kinds of the actors, and I can't believe that they threw away all their stuff.
Yeah, they didn't throw it away, but Colleen's stuff, they didn't properly preserve, so it got destroyed.
But how about the stuff for Peter Lorre?
Yeah, they still have a lot. Yeah, they have a huge collection, so I don't want anyone to think they got rid of it.
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, they still, and I don't want to say like they're bad, they screwed up on her stuff, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, the Peter Lorre movie I saw was his first movie in silence, and they did move the movie in a way that things happened, but nobody actually knew what was happening.
Yeah.
For example, in this one movie, his first murder movie, he just followed the person he was going to kill, but you never saw that happen. Peter Lorre was in as a fellow who was looking to kill somebody in the movie, and he did it without ever you are seeing that they killed the person. This was one of the first new ways that they were looking for him to do something.
We got our first television in 1948, and I don't think we appreciate now how important movies were before 1948, 1950. Movies were the most, popular form of entertainment. Television wasn't around for most people.
Yeah, no, and just to that point, like that's one of the things I had fun writing about in the book is, kind of why my character Doreen would want to go into that industry, just like how magical it was when she first saw a film. And I think, yeah, we can imagine, we can have empathy for it, but to have actually been there, and actually just get to go in the dark with a room full of other people and watch people on the screen. And one of the themes that I work with in the book is this idea of why she was into fairies, which is because her grandma was from Ireland and told her stories of fairies. And fairies in Celtic folklore are not like Disney fairies who grant you wishes. They're tricksters. They cause trouble. You might not want to go into a deal with them because they'll be trying to swindle you. And in Ireland, they have this concept of the thin place, like thin places, which is this idea of where the membrane between this world and whatever else is out there becomes thin and you can cross over, and that's how, fairies get here, and if they like steal a human child or whatever. And to me, and a thing, if you read the book, you'll see this, but to capture that, like how crazy it was to see movies, Doreen kind of sees cinema as a thin place, a place where you can go watch the screen and kind of beam yourself into this other world. And then if you're an actor, you really, like Hollywood is kind of a thin place where you are someone, but you also get to be someone else and, all of that. So, yeah.
And in the early days, didn't they travel from town to town that might not have theaters and hang a sheet up
Yeah.
and invite the whole community?
Yeah, true Nickelodeons, where they would, it would just be like a funeral parlor or something. They'd bring in some folding chairs and hang a sheet and just like charge you a nickel, yeah.
How did the castle end up in Chicago?
Yeah, I didn't cover that, so great question. So when she fell in love with Homer, her third husband, and when she had to stop touring the castle because of World War II, she ended up settling in Chicago because that's where Homer was based for Merrill Lynch. And so she became like a huge fixture in the social life of the city and the financial life. She was a huge philanthropist. She was instrumental in organizing the Chicago Film Festival, which still happens today. And so in the course of all that, she met all the movers and shakers, and she was at a dinner with the president of the MSI, and the two of them, by the end of the meal, they had like talked each other into this deal where she's like, my fairy castle needs a home, and he's like, we might like to have it. And the clause that she put in it, she was a very, she'd been dealing with contracts at that point for a very long time, and she was very savvy about them, and so she put in this clause that the museum could have it, but while she was living, she could come to it whenever she wanted and play with it, which you saw her doing. And Alice, her granddaughter, said that whenever they would go, she would always, Colleen, would be like, oh my gosh, look over there, I just saw one of the fairies. And every time Alice turned around, she would be like, where? And Colleen would be like, oh, you just missed her. So lots of that. And then also, she said that the contract was good, but if they took the castle off display, it reverted to her family and they no longer had the rights to it, because she knows, and again, no shade to museums, not saying they're bad, but they have so much stuff, so they rotate, they have to. There's so much stuff at any point that they have that they're not displaying. But she was like, I don't want that to happen to my castle. So she said that if they ever took it down, they would lose it, which is why back in 2014-ish, about 10 years ago now, they had to do a big renovation because the electricity needed to be redone, the running water was corroding things. So they had to figure out this way to restore it without removing it. And if you went to the museum at that time, they did this full display restoration where the people who were refurbishing it were doing it in front of the audience. So technically, it wasn't on display as it would have been, but it technically never went off display. And the reason that Colleen especially wanted the museum at the MSI is it is the museum in Chicago that is visited by the most children every year, and she really wanted children to see it. And I think it worked because this child saw it, and look at us now.
About her first husband, John McCormick, was he the tenor?
No, he was not the tenor.
He was not the tenor. And what was the problem with the marriage?
Yeah, so great question. So John McCormick was a publicity man at first, and then he went on to become a producer. And he was super, super energetic and super good at promotion. And so when Colleen was out there, she got a lot of roles, and she was kind of famous and kind of doing well, but she hadn't really broken through to be a star yet. And so he helped her kind of do that. But one hesitates to go back in time and, diagnose people, but he probably had bipolar disorder. He had mania and depression. And so when he was manic, he was working 80-hour weeks, just tirelessly, just super on, super good at his job. But when he was depressed, he drank, and he drank a lot, and he became violent, and he tried to kill her twice. So she forgave him once. He dangled her out the window of the Ambassador Hotel in New York. And threatened to drop her, and then the other time he tried to strangle her. So, that's why, I don't want to make it sound like I talk about her joie de vivre, and she was a very buoyant person, and her life was charmed in a lot of ways, but she did go through, a lot of, heavy darkness.
Who made everything in the fairy castle? Did she do any work herself, or was it all contracted out?
Great question. So the castle is a combination of stuff from her own personal collection prior to when she started building the castle. So she didn't personally make any of it. So a lot of it was stuff that went all the way back to her childhood, because she kept dollhouses from when she was like 6 years old. So a lot of it was just stuff that people had given her. And then, like I said, there was the Valentino suits of armor. And so a lot of people, after they made a picture with her at like the cast party or the wrap party, would give her like a little miniature token. And then whenever she would tour with the movies for the releases, she would hit the shops, the antique shops. And then when she was building the castle, she commissioned people to do stuff. And I have a few of these in the novel, but my favorite one is she really, really wanted to have Cinderella's glass slippers in the castle. And every glass blower that she went to, who was a professional, like in a studio, said like, that's not possible, because she was doing the 1 foot is 1 inch scale. And to that scale, they would have been so tiny, and everyone's like, we cannot do that, that's not possible. So she found the glass blower who traveled with Ringling Brothers Circus and did like weird novelty stuff, and was like, can you do it? And he was like, of course. And he made them. So she, to me, and I kind of write about this in the novel, I don't know if she saw herself this way, so this is fiction, this is Kathleen Rooney, not Colleen Moore, but to me, that's her like being a director. Like even back in Hollywood, early Hollywood, women were not really directors. You know, even today we don't have as many women directors as we should, but back then there were almost none. And this to me is her taking a project and being like, I can direct. Because she knew what she wanted, she had a vision, and she just like executed it by finding the right people.
In what year did she die?
1988. Yeah, and a fun thing that like I like to share is so after Homer died, she kept her relationship to Chicago. He died in 1964, which was super sad because she found her love and they only got to be together for like 20 years, which is great, but not, it ended too soon. And so after, like in the 80s, she had her 4th husband. She just kept on living, but she moved out to Paso Robles, California, to live on a ranch next door to King Vidor, who I'm pretty sure they were in love in real life too. In the book, I definitely have fun with that. And her daughter, still, Judith Coleman, who's I think 95 now, lives in the Paso Robles property and has read the book and liked it and seems like a really cool person. So her family's cool. So thank you all so much. Go see her movies. Go see the castle. Buy a book. I'll sign it if you want. And thank you so much.
Thank you.